Hi, this is Dustin with Dustin's Dollars. Today I'm going to be talking about why I think Bitcoin can hit $500,000 per Bitcoin. I'm going to go over sort of why my valuation model for that. And before I begin, let me remind you that I am not a financial advisor or a financial professional of any sort. All opinions that I express in this video are mine and do not represent those of any company or any other individual. I may own some of the assets discussed in this video, so basically this video should be for your entertainment purposes only because I could be wrong about everything that I say in this video. You need to do your own research before making any investment decisions. So, the case for 500,000 Bitcoin. The overall thesis here is simple. Uh, my first video that I did on Bitcoin describing it, I said that my 1 second summary of Bitcoin is it is digital gold. And my investing thesis for Bitcoin is actually that Bitcoin is better than gold for investors, and that therefore Bitcoin will eventually roughly at least match gold's current market capitalization. And so here's your Bitcoin chart over time. I have that just in case we need to refer to that. But if you look at the market cap of gold, here it is. This is from a website. I assume that it's accurate. It's at least consistent with what I've read in other places. That gold has about a $12 trillion market cap. That might be too small for you to see. It's right here. I'll make it bigger. There we go. Gold, the largest market cap asset in the world, at least as far as they're defining assets, of $12.2 trillion. Now, as I outlined in my prior video about Bitcoin, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. So if we take that 12, let's say 12, and let's just 12 trillion expressed as millions, right? This would be 12 million millions to be 12 trillion. Divide that by the 21 million Bitcoins that there will only ever be. And you would get a price per Bitcoin that might be too small for you to see, but of roughly, this is 571,000. I just rounded it off to 500,000, right? Somewhere in that vicinity. This isn't, precise. The precision is not important here. But that's the fundamental thesis. And so that's how I get to that. And now, why do I think the fundamental piece of that, the crux of that argument is that I think that Bitcoin is better than gold for investors. And so what I just found an article from Investopedia. This is a fairly reputable and popular site, I think, for investing information. And so I wanted to look through what are the reasons that they sort of call out for why people want to own gold. And these are their 8 reasons. They say it has a history of holding its value, that the U.S. dollar is weak, and that gold is an inflation hedge, right? That your dollar or whatever currency loses real purchasing power over time. They also talk about deflation protection. I actually don't get into that, but I think that Bitcoin does also fit this property, even though I'm personally don't really include that in my thesis. We have geopolitical uncertainty, right? That's sort of the risk that you have where the politicians could get involved and could mess with your currency, right? As you're seeing, today with Russia, honestly, the Russian ruble, there's issues there. There are supply constraints, right? That Bitcoin or that gold, there's only so much gold, or there's only so much gold that you can actually economically mine at any given point in time, so that the supply is roughly fixed, or at least is predictable. Part of their thesis here was that there is increasing demand. I actually I don't really rely on that for trying to argue that Bitcoin is better than gold, although I'll touch on that, I suppose. And then there's also the portfolio diversification, right? The gold is uncorrelated with some other things, and so if you wanted to have an asset that will, let's say, rise in value when some other things fall in value, that's an argument for a lot of people. So if I kind of go through and talk through a couple of these points here and how that relates to how gold and Bitcoin compare, let's just throw it out there. The one, the very first one, maybe I missed this in the video, I don't recall mentioning, but a history of holding its value, right? This is honestly the biggest argument, that is devil's advocate argument against Bitcoin, is to say, look, there's just not the history, right? And it remains to be seen. And I'll admit this fully, even though I have made up my personal opinion of of what I think is the answer, but you can make an argument that Bitcoin is just a Ponzi scheme, roughly, right? Or it's, people call it reference to the tulip mania, right? Where at some point in the, I can remember hundreds of years ago, people thought that tulips were the most valuable commodity, and so people were actually trading tulips for larger and larger, real assets, or that they value tulips more and more and more. And that it remains to be seen if Bitcoin actually is like that. I have, again, reasons for believing that it is not, but that's you can argue that, and it's true that Bitcoin just does not have the same history as gold. Nothing else really does, right? There's thousands of years of history of holding value. However, I think that actually the argument gets weaker every day, right? As Bitcoin does continue to, maintain a value, and does maintain, actually goes up in value over time. It gets harder and harder to say that, oh yeah, it's really just, it's a fad. People are gonna stop caring about it. It's gonna go down to zero, right? And because if you do look at the long-term price history, it is reasonable. You could have made that argument somewhere around this vicinity, even in 2019, and even this chart doesn't go out far enough back, but I think there was a time around 2017, 2016, maybe, where you had something similar. This chart actually, you can't even see it because because things have gone up so much in recent history. But if I go back here, the argument, just summing up that point, is that the history of Bitcoin grows every day, and I think that was definitely true years ago. Every day it gets less and less true. That's really all that I can say about that one. The weakness of the U.S. dollar, I think this is true for any currency, right? The whole point is that this is a separate asset that has value in and of itself, right? And they actually have this. I'm not going to go into this one too much. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Now, as an inflation hedge, I think this is also pretty self-explanatory, and this ties very strongly into supply constraints that, over time. Well, maybe I shouldn't say this is self-explanatory. This is partially, I think, the inflation hedge goes to, the previous point. It's a combination of an asset that holds its value over time, and that there is a supply constraint, right? That's really how you consider this thing is going to be an inflation hedge, right? Because inflation, oftentimes, right, you can tie inflation to actually just a larger supply of money, right? In terms of, there are more dollars floating around now than there were 100 years ago. Like it just wouldn't have been feasible for a loaf of bread to cost, $3 100 years ago, just because there wasn't that much money around. There would have been a major mismatch between the dollars and the quantity of bread that's around. And so I think that's, Bitcoin does have this. If Bitcoin continues to hold value and builds up this history of holding value, I think that, coupled with the supply, will mean that it does end up being a good inflation hedge. As I already said, I'm actually not. I don't care about deflation protection. I don't think this is a. I think any argument they really make there applies the same as what I just said for an inflation hedge. So copy paste that discussion. Geopolitical uncertainty, right? And I talked about this last time, that Bitcoin is very decentralized. I think it is roughly as decentralized as gold. I think it's hard to really make an argument one way or the other. And in fact, you could maybe even make some argument that gold is much more controlled, I think, by central banks, like this actual supply of gold. And so does that lend itself to some amount of manipulation because there's a large concentration of gold in the hands of government? I don't know. So you can sort of argue that one way or the other. And supply constraints, right? I talked about this last time, but there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins, period. And in fact, we have a very, very good idea of exactly how many Bitcoins are now going to be come into existence, right? We call them being mined over time. And we know that the last Bitcoin will be mined, the last chunk of a Bitcoin will be mined sometime in the year, around 2140. And again, it's not exact, but it's pretty close to that. So those are, that's sort of me going through these points. And then the last one here is increasing demand. I guess there's two more. Increasing demand. Again, this is another one that remains to be seen. And I think you could argue, you could make any argument you would make about gold, you could make about Bitcoin as well in terms of what is the future demand going to be. It's hard to predict. I think that's its own complete separate question. Although, I would pose the question to you, if we look at recent history, what has grown more in demand, Bitcoin or gold? And do you think that that trend is going to continue or not? So that's just my, general commentary on that. And then portfolio diversification, right? Is Bitcoin correlated to other assets? And I actually have this open. There's a table that was put together by ARK Invest. They have a whole PDF explaining some of their rationale around Bitcoin, and they do touch on this, right? That the Bitcoin as a replacement for gold, as a store of value, is really the term that you hear a lot of people use. But you can read the Bitcoin white paper if you want. You can just Google for that from ARK Invest, and you'll find that. But the one piece that I found most interesting out of this is their correlation chart, and they show that over I think this is over 10 years maybe. I had actually read this over earlier, and sorry, I forgot myself. They have a whole paragraph talking about their methodology. But the point is, on the time period that they measured with their methodology, Bitcoin was the lowest correlated asset with anything else, right? And gold is actually on here and does have low correlation to many things, but Bitcoin, tends to be lower on many of these assets. And I would actually say that for a lot of people, for many people who have significant amounts of wealth that they're trying to preserve or grow, I think the S&P 500 is actually a very, very critical asset to decide or to look at to see how does this correlate to the asset, right? And so for Bitcoin, we see that correlated, with a 0.26 correlation coefficient, and we can see that for gold it was 0.37. So there was actually much higher correlation to, to the U.S. large cap stock market in gold rather than Bitcoin. So, if you're looking for something uncorrelated, I think Bitcoin is, mathematically shown to be better than gold. A couple less obvious points that are not actually, not derivative of that article, I think, is the actual fees for buying, storing, owning gold, right? This is, if you want to actually buy a lot of gold, you got to figure out how you're going to actually buy it and get it, and then how are you going to store and secure it, right? And I think that's it's either that or you buy it as part of an ETF, in which case, that is its own separate thing, is that you need to sort of deal with. No, all those products have their own fees associated with them. But for gold, I just found this calculator online. If you're going to buy it and have physical gold, to buy it, hold it for 10 years, you're going to end up paying 2.2% in fees, all in if you buy it and then sell it at the end of the store for 10 years in a secure vault here. And the one other thing that I noticed is at least the price that they're quoting you for buying this gold is higher than at least what Google says is the spot price by roughly 2%, maybe slightly less than 2% there. So that might be another hidden cost that you have there. Whereas, on Bitcoin, you can buy from the leading exchange, which is Coinbase, I think for about, I want to say it's a third of a percent to buy and a third of a percent to sell. So maybe you're totally up to 2/3 of a percent in fees. And you can store it indefinitely for free, effectively, right? It's just math that you just need a key. That's all you really need there. No, sorry, 24 word key, right? Like it's not even any. I say key, but I really mean just the seed phrase for your Bitcoin private key there. So I think Bitcoin is better in that aspect. I think another one that is, Bitcoiners talk about that's not obvious when you just originally consider trying to compare Bitcoin and gold is that Bitcoin is divisible. So if I went to actually buy, when I talk about gold, you're talking about, well, I have to buy 1 kilogram of gold in terms of the bar there. Surely they have smaller units, but your fees are going to go up for that. And, 1 kilogram of gold is like $60,000, which is not, at least to me, not a small amount of money. And, for Bitcoin, you can certainly buy $60,000 worth of Bitcoin if you want. You can also buy, $25 worth of Bitcoin. It's divisible into sort of any denomination that you want. Because each Bitcoin is, as I mentioned before, divisible into actually 100,000 smaller units called Satoshis. So So that I think is, an area where Bitcoin clearly wins. And, um, I already touched on the demand, but I did want to go back to that and just to say that, you know, historically Bitcoin demand has grown and it has continued to grow. And, that is actually a key part of my thesis. And you need to make your own, determination on whether you think that's likely to happen or not. I mean, and again, going back to my thesis of Bitcoin become a better gold, I think that most people do not understand Bitcoin well enough to even enumerate the reasons that I went through in this video here, right? And so I think over time, Bitcoin will become more widely understood, and the reasons that I've laid out here, will be known to more people, and so a lot of the people who purchase gold for some of those reasons will strongly consider purchasing Bitcoin instead. And I think this is actually going to, you know, excuse me, there's actually sort of a positive feedback loop here, right? Where the more people that buy Bitcoin and have a vested interest in it, that is going to be sort of a positively impact the velocity of that information getting around to people, more people learning about it, more people being, you know, having that knowledge and potentially making a decision to also invest in some Bitcoin. And, also for that matter, just again, to be clear on this thesis, like, I don't think this is needs to be a, Ponzi scheme where everybody gets everybody involved and everyone on the planet holds Bitcoin, right? My investing thesis for at least getting to a $500,000 valuation per Bitcoin is that, similar amounts of people that invest in gold would invest in Bitcoin, right? Just so that it roughly matches that market cap, or, captures 90% of it, if you will. And another part of my thesis there is that over time, like, I really think younger people, let's say people under the age of 25 or something, are probably much more likely to know about Bitcoin, and that as time goes on, the proportion of people that as of today are 25 or younger are going to be more and more and more of the world, and that those folks, it is going to be a much higher likelihood that if they have the situation in life where they would invest in something like gold, that they will already have some understanding of Bitcoin, and that they will have familiarity with Bitcoin, and that they will invest in that instead. So that is, in a nutshell, I say in a nutshell after 15 minutes, my all the reasons why I sort of buy into this thesis that Bitcoin could grow to a valuation of $500,000 per Bitcoin. So I hope that was helpful for you. I hope you enjoyed the video, and that's all I want to cover. So I will see you next time. Have a good